Welcome to the Greater Irvine Chamber Innovators Journey podcast series, where we explore the stories, strategies, and lessons learned from early-stage and entrepreneurial business leaders shaping the future. Your host today is Dave Coffaro, President and CEO of the Greater Irvine Chamber.
Well, hello, folks, and welcome to the Greater Irvine Chamber Business Insight Podcast. I'm Dave Coffaro. I'm your host today. And this conversation is really going to be an interesting one. Our guest this afternoon is Matt Harding. He's founder and CEO of EcoMetrix, and he is a PhD from MIT in economics. So he is at the heart of decision making and using AI in order to do it even better in business. So, Matt, thanks so much for joining us today. I appreciate you being here.
Hi, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So, to start out, maybe share a little bit about your background as an econometrician and with your PhD in economics and kind of how that all comes together and how it's evolved into the work that you do today in your firm.
Thank you. I started my personal journey at MIT, getting a PhD in econometrics, which is essentially the more technical side of economics that focuses on how we use statistics and models to really understand the quantitative nature of the different things that economics is about. And my journey has a strong connection to my academic journey. So after finishing my PhD at MIT, I was a professor at Stanford for a number of years, and then I took a detour into the policy world, and I spent a couple of years in Washington, D.C. So a lot of it, I think, was motivated by the desire to essentially bridge the gap between the academic side of the world and industry, because very often I think one of the things that I've seen is in academia, people tend to work on challenging but very often irrelevant problems, while at the same time, businesses are struggling to find good and effective business solutions. And sometimes the answer to a lot of those things might be in one of the things that is studied in academia. So EcoMetrix was built essentially to bridge some of this gap and really take advantage of many of the innovations that have happened in the academic world. So we really emphasize human capital and education a lot, and so a lot of our employees have this very strong academic background that makes work so exciting every day.
So, you're bringing together the best of the research world, the practical application of that research, and our audience represents small, medium, and large companies in the region. And so it might be helpful to start with sort of a bigger picture view because you work at the crux of one of the most important topics of the day, which is artificial intelligence. And we know AI is changing the way that businesses approach decision making, engagement with their clients, engagement with the world. Could you talk a little bit about sort of how you see AI coming to bear for the benefit of all types of businesses in decision making?
Yes, I think AI is, of course, something that we are all very concerned about. Some of us are very optimistic about it. Some of us are very hesitant about AI. But I do see AI as just a continuation of a process that has probably started now maybe 10, 15 years ago. And that really happened with the big data revolution. Nothing that we're seeing today in terms of AI could really have happened without the incredible amount of data that we have access to. So I always like to remind people it was probably around 2010 that many people are kind of citing the beginning of this big data revolution. There's a famous quote from Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO of Google at the time, and I know people have kind of challenged whether he ever said this, but at the time he said something of the sort that there are 5 exabytes of information created between the dawn of civilization through something like 2003. but that we are creating that much information now every 2 days. So if you think about what that meant, and obviously this was 15 years ago, it meant that within a matter of days, we're creating more information than our entire civilization had created from the beginning of time. So I think it was a realization that many had at the time that the world in some way has fundamentally changed. The way businesses have to operate has fundamentally changed because now we live in this sort of data-rich economy where there's massive amounts of data that's being generated, and it's being generated at increasing rates. And with all this data comes new power, comes new technology. And we've now seen this transformative process happening over a number of years. And that started off with data analytics, with machine learning. Companies have started to better engage with that data in terms of forecasting, in terms of a more accurate customer segmentation. And in some way, I think what is happening with AI is really just part of that continuous process where we are able to better capitalize on this massive amount of data that we have in the economy. So whether you are a sort of a big company or a small company, you are most likely still going to have access to plenty of data. And some of that data can now be used in terms of what are called LLMs, which are these large language models. That's what most people think about when they're talking about Gen AI right now. But really, it is part of this ongoing process that has focused on our ability to make better and better predictions, because at the very heart of this, AI is essentially a predictive tool. If you think about how LLMs work, they are you are asking a question and they are predicting the words that would best answer that question that you phrased. So now I think we are in a position where we are simply much better at making predictions based on existing data. And so I think whether you are a small company, a medium company, or a large company, the first thing you ought to be thinking about is, what is the data that I have and what's the data that I can leverage to make better predictions? And how am I going to capitalize based on this better prediction? So I think AI is really just one of the tools, but we shouldn't forget about other tools in data science like machine learning that are fundamentally also providing these kinds of insights.
You're hitting on something that I hear from business owners, business leaders often, which is like this: I'm overwhelmed with the amount of data that I've got. I'm overloaded. In fact, I was talking to one of our members that runs a software company this morning, and he was saying, we've got so much information, so much data that we don't know what to pick in order to evaluate how things are going with our clients, right? So how can AI help sort through kind of this massive amount of customer information or business information and extract some meaningful, actionable insights?
Thank you, Dave, for asking the question. This is a question that we also encounter in EcoMetrix all the time, and I would say probably all the conversations that we have with clients really start with this question. I have data, but very often that data is messy. Very often customers just have data that's in many different formats. It was collected at different points in time. It comes with different vintages. So before I think one should even think about using AI on any of the data that they have, it's really important to think about the data engineering aspect of it. How do I actually get all this data together? How do I actually turn it into data and data structures like databases that a more advanced system like AI can even operate on. And that is not an easy task, especially for small businesses to perform, because another insight that I've had from my work at EcoMetrix is that it's very rarely the case that the business can just hire one person, even if that person is a data scientist with a PhD from Harvard, say, and actually make significant progress, because you typically are going to need a team to make sense, a team with very different capabilities, in order to sort through the data that you have. And there's a fair amount of data science, of data engineering that needs to be put to use. And at the same time, I think there's still another aspect of this I think is becoming increasingly important, which is data privacy. And I think many businesses out there are quite hesitant to engage with AI at this point, because they are concerned about how AI companies are using the data that they have. What does it mean to actually use an AI tool on data that you provide? And so I think one of the things that we're seeing quite a lot is increased regulation, but even more so increased self-regulation. I think we very often talk to companies who are saying, um, we either can't use AI tools at all, or we need to impose guardrails around it. But the good news is that there are actually a lot of things that the companies do to create privacy and to address the data challenges before tools like AI can actually be applied to it. So I would say, don't even ask the question about how AI can help through the massive amount of data. First, invest into laying the foundation to even be able to do so. Because in my experience, most companies are not ready to actually go all the way and actually even apply the AI tools that exist in the market at this point.
Hmm. Good counsel. So let's get a little bit more basic. You specialize in predictive and causal AI. What exactly does that mean, and how can businesses use this kind of a methodology to improve their decision making, to improve business strategies?
Thank you. I think it's a really important distinction that we sometimes overlook, which is that there are essentially two business decisions that we very often engage in. One is a predictive decision where we have to essentially imagine the world stays the same. If everything continues as it does, what is the best tool that we have that is going to allow us to predict what is going to happen tomorrow, or what is going to happen for a different customer, maybe than the customer I am currently working with? But some of those predictive questions are not always sufficient. And that's where kind of causal inference comes into play. And so causal analytics is a related but somewhat distinct aspect of how we use data in data science. And causality, as you probably know, has a long philosophical tradition. Philosophers have talked about causality for thousands of years. But in business, we are essentially asking a question about what would have happened if something were or were not to be the case. So rather than taking the world as it is, we are asking, what if is there a causal mechanism? Is there something fundamentally true about the relationship that businesses and customers have, or the decisions that customers make? And is that relationship something that is going to persist, even if many other things around them actually change? So probably the example that most people are familiar with nowadays is in the discussion around medicine or vaccines. We want to make sure that our medications, our vaccines actually act fundamentally at the biological level in such a way that they're actually curing the disease or preventing a disease. And that is not simply a predictive question. It actually becomes a question about disentangling the deep underlying mechanisms that exist in nature, and making sure those are robust to the all the noise that happens around you in the world.
So there is a lot to it, and that's why having a firm that understands the causal connectivity and being able to benefit from that as you think about predictive use is so important. AI-driven personalization is a trend. We read about that, we hear about it. How can businesses, especially smaller ones, use AI to create highly targeted efforts where they know exactly who to talk to about a specific offer, a specific thing that could be meaningful to them?
Thank you, Dave. I think that's a really good question, and it's again one of these questions that I think all businesses ought to ask themselves: how do I actually do it? It goes back to the fact that businesses have a large amount of data on their customers, and we also live in this world that has a lot of data that could be added. Much of the data is publicly available. So one of the things that these predictive tools and AI in particular is very good at is taking the data that's available and figuring out how to create customer profiles. So we have one tool at EcoMetrix that we rely on that we call data DNA. If you think about what it does, it essentially looks at a customer, and depending on the sector that a customer is in, there might be data on consumption, there might be data on demographics, there might be data on the neighborhood where a customer lives. And it takes all those many different data elements apart, and it creates something like a what I call sort of like a DNA element, which is out of all the stuff that's available, you can essentially record maybe hundreds or thousands of different characteristics of that customer. And we suddenly go from like, very sparse information about the customer to a very, very detailed understanding of the customer. Now, one of the things that's really quite remarkable of what's happened in with the use of AI recently is that some of these processes were done by marketers in the past, and they were done manually, where people would essentially engage in what I would call sort of armchair economics. We would sit around in a meeting, and we would try and figure out what is it about the customer that really matters. Now, with all this new technology, we no longer do that. In fact, the AI so does it for us. And some of the things that it discovers are not even things that we as humans would have ever figured out ourselves, because they are part of a different logic maybe that we'd have applied to. But the criterion is ultimately, is that something that really truly characterizes the customer and can be used to predict maybe the adoption of a new product, or whether the customer is going to purchase or not purchase something, or how they're going to react in a given even campaign. So I think personalization is one of the buzzwords that I think we're going to see a lot more of. And it really starts with our ability to kind of think about the customer as an individual. And I think that's sort of like, I would say, almost like one side of the coin, because the other side of that coin is we now have AI technology that allows us to create content at a much lower cost that we've been able to do in the past. So if you think that you now have maybe thousands of segments that really characterize your customer base, now you also have the technology to operate maybe thousands of different campaigns, where each of the customers in one of these segments is going to see maybe a different piece of marketing, or maybe they'll have a different experience where they log into a website or into some sort of portal. And all of that is possible because we are able to create a lot more creative work at much lower cost than it's ever been possible before.
As you're saying this, Matt, it just occurs to me, this has got to be the best time ever in all of history to be in business, because the resources, the ability that you're talking about, think about the age-old question: who's our customer? What do they consider a value? What can we deliver that's a value? Those fundamental things that, frankly, so many businesses have not been able to answer properly. Today, there are the tools to help do that, and that sort of gets us to this whole notion that I think is so exciting about how behavioral science and AI are moving together in really fascinating ways. How can businesses use sort of the power of AI insights into human behavior to better connect with those they serve?
Thank you, Dave. I'm going to agree wholeheartedly with you. I think this is a fantastic time to actually be in business, because all the innovations around us are just opening up so many new doors and so many new possibilities, through which businesses can serve customers and address the needs that customers have. And business has always been about an interplay between some of these more kind of quantitative aspects that come from economics, and maybe some of these softer aspects that come from human behavior. It does go back to really kind of understanding what motivates customers, understanding how customers react to sort of information. And so all of these things, many of these things, I would say, fall under this heading of sort of behavioral economics. And I'm sure many people here are so familiar with the idea of a nudge that's been very important in the last 10, 15 years in terms of how businesses think about changing customer behavior. And now I think with AI, again, we have a number of additional tools that we can bring to this. And if you think about it, as at its foundation, a nudge is about information. We are providing customers with the information that they need in order to make a better choice. Nowadays, information, I would say, it's very, very increasingly trickier to find because we live in a world where there is so much information. So one of the questions that we ask and answer at EcoMetrix is, what are good ways in which we can encourage customers to engage more when it comes to energy efficiency? Now, that requires you to know quite a bit about maybe what are the available programs from your local utility, maybe what are the available products that you can buy at your local Home Depot. And it can be very overwhelming to actually think about all of these different things in order to make a choice. And one of the products that we're currently developing for a client is an AI chatbot that actually knows information about you. It connects to the data that the utility has, so it knows your energy use. It knows what products are available to purchase from the local marketplace. And suddenly, you no longer feel alone as part of this process, and you have an AI that can guide you through the entire process of learning what the best solution is for you, learning what the best price is for you, learning how to compare some of these things. And if you are like me and you every time you have to fix something in your house, you are a little bit lost at what is the best thing to do and how to do it. I think you are going to find that many of these chatbots are now going to enter the market, then they're going to guide us through some of these things that might have been very confusing, mysterious, and ultimately really inefficient as we go through our lives.
I think that's so interesting. Just seeing how we're going to be able to bring that to a very practical level. I've got one last question. We've got time for one more question, and that is, as you take a look ahead, Matt, and you look at how AI is evolving and how it's sort of coming together with your whole world, what are some of the emerging trends that business owners should be on the watch for?
It's of course the million-dollar question: what is going to come next as far as AI is concerned? And I think an old joke says that you should never really ask an economist to make a forecast because we will never really agree on anything. So I'm sure everyone's going to disagree on these things, especially because I think the horizon when it comes to AI development has become so incredibly short. I think when we'll have these discussions in the past about technology, we might say what is going to happen next year or what's going to happen in the next 5 years. But the reality is nowadays things are developing so rapidly in AI that it can be hard to know what's going to happen next week. And we are constantly surprised about just what's over the horizon. But here's my prediction, I think, in terms of what we are going to see. I think we now have sufficient technology on the market to really experience a sense of sort of maturation and diversification. I think the existing tools provide a base level of functionality that is now ready to be customized. And I would say probably most of the conversations we are having at EcoMetrix with clients are of the sort, we know that these AI tools can do all these magical things. Can you make an AI tool that really is customized to my data, to my customers, to my company, and really is very, very focused on solving a problem that I have, as opposed to this sort of all-purpose tools? And I think that is actually sort of a really important part of what we're going to see next, because I expect more and more AI tools are going to be integrated in business processes. And some of that is going to be customer facing, but I also think some of it is going to impact the way we actually do business, because there is going to be a higher expectation of higher accuracy, better writing, better reports, better documentation. So I think when businesses are going to think about what they expect their employees to do and how they expect the work to be performed, I think standards are going to rise across a variety of industry. And that is going to lead to key strategic advantages to early adopters that are going to embrace this technology. And I would say lastly, so my third point here is I think we're going to see increased focus on security concerns and cybersecurity. AI opens a whole new doors that can be exploited by bad actors, and we know the world that we live in. You know, is one where many of these actors could take advantage of some of these things. And so I think customers are becoming also much more knowledgeable about what AI is and how the data is being used. So I think we're going to see increased focus on integrating AIs with data in such a way that customer data is kept secure and private, while at the same time taking advantage of the magic, I would say, that all these AI tools are providing. So overall, I'm very excited. I'm very much sort of like a techno optimist. I think the things are going to be tremendously exciting as we go forward, and as these tools are going to become much more commonly used in many different activities.
I love the term techno-optimist. That's fantastic and a great way to bring closure to a wonderful conversation. Matt Harding, EcoMetrix, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast today. Folks, thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Dave. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for joining us for the Greater Irvine Chamber Innovators Journey podcast. To stay informed about upcoming episodes and other important business news, please subscribe to our channel or check the Greater Irvine Chamber website and mobile app.